Hello. Today we're going to be talking about your art prompt number 7. And as you remember, I made a mistake and I thought that art prompt number 6 was art prompt number 5. So I actually didn't assign art prompt number 5. I just called art prompt number 6 art prompt number 5. So we just decided to skip art prompt number 5, and we actually did art prompt number 6, but I called it number 5. That might be confusing, but if you're following along in your booklet, it might make more sense. So our next one is art prompt number 7, and this one is about collage. Now, I gave you a couple different examples of artists who use collage in their work. First one was Jean Arp, and what Jean Arp did was take random pieces of paper. It could be colored paper, it could be not colored paper, rip them up into little pieces, and would take another piece of paper on a table or on the ground, and then take the little pieces and drop the little pieces. And wherever those pieces fell, he would glue them onto the paper. So it's kind of like a random, haphazard, using the element of chance to create artwork. So you could do something like that, but you don't have to. The only requirement for this assignment is that you use collage. So the word collage means to glue, and it comes from the French word coller, which means to glue. So as long as you're gluing things onto another surface, so that's why I gave you the National Geographic magazines. You can use that, but you could also use flyers. You could use family photographs. If you want to do that, you can. You don't have to cut up your family photographs, but if that's something you want to do, or if you want to go and get photocopies made, do that safely and carefully, obviously, because you'll have to go out of your house. But yeah, anything that you can cut up, or if you have an old book that you don't want anymore, or newspapers, old greeting cards, you can use anything like that to cut up and cut the images or words. You can use words in your collage as well, and try to create an interesting composition. So the nice thing about collage is that you can play with different things. You can play with proportion and size. For instance, in the example that I gave you, one of the Guy Madden ones, and Guy Madden's a Winnipeg artist. He's actually a filmmaker, but he likes to use collage to kind of get him thinking about possibilities. And one of the things that's a really hard thing for all artists, well, not hard, but it's like the real work. It's the thinking work, is where do you get your ideas from? How do you get ideas for making art? Because you don't want to just copy art that someone else made. You want to have your own unique ideas. And this idea of making something unique and creative and new that no one else has done before is probably one of the most important things that all artists strive to do. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't get your ideas from somewhere or someone else. It's totally fine to take or to get inspiration from other artists or from other places, because we don't live in a vacuum. We can't just get our ideas from nowhere. They don't just jump into our heads. It has to come from somewhere else. So Guy Madden also often use like things that exist already, like images from books or magazines or posters, collages, and use them in his artwork to get him thinking about ideas for movies or films that he's going to create. And the nice thing about collages is you can take two very different things and put them beside each other, and then your viewer has to kind of make sense of those things. Why are those two things in the same image together? So it's called juxtaposition if you're putting something by something else. And like this as opposed to this, and what does that mean when they're together, what connection they have. So it kind of forces your viewer, if you have two things that are very dissimilar, they're not the same at all in any way really, or it's not really evident that they're the same or have any connection, but because they're being put in the same artwork together beside each other, your viewer, this is what we do as human beings, our brains, this is how we learn. We have to make connections between what we know and what we don't know. and making connections between two things that are not similar helps us learn. It makes us think. So we're trying to find that connection between these two objects that are not really the same, but our brains automatically want to find a connection because that's how our brains learn. So that's what your viewer is going to be doing. And you can pick two things that you don't know the connection between, but you could just pick two random things and leave it up to your viewer to try to figure out what that connection is. And then different people, depending on who's seeing it, will interpret it in different ways. So that's a really neat thing that art can do. And you don't have to have all the answers for your artwork as the artist. You can just give your viewer the question, and that's kind of the fun part for the viewers, trying to figure out, well, what could this mean? And it might mean something different to one person and something else to another person. So I hope that makes sense. I was trying to think what else. Oh yeah, I was talking about proportion and size. So in the Guy Madden one, the woman is really big. So I'm trying to see if I can find that one here actually. I just have it on the book here. It's hard for me to show. Okay, so this one, the woman in the landscape. So she's kind of really big, and then the landscape in comparison to the landscape. And then you can see down here, I don't even think it's like a little person or like a farmer or an animal pulling a cart or something, maybe tilling the land down there. So this is really big. Normally it's not in proportion, so the proportion is kind of skewed, okay? It's like exaggerated proportion or skewed proportion. So that makes your viewer think like, well, who is this? What is this woman doing here? Why is she so big? Why are there only parts of her showing? And Guy Madden, maybe he doesn't know the answers to these questions, but he wants the viewer to think about it. Like, what kind of story could you make up with this, right? So he uses those ideas as kind of like jumping off points for his films, and to get him thinking and to get his viewer thinking. And sometimes it's just weird, and sometimes weird can be really interesting, and you can try to make your own inferences about what that means. So that's that. And then the other artist I gave you, I'll just show you the rest of, you have this, but so once again, you have Guy Madden's collages. They're not in color here, but if you're looking on Google Classroom, they are in color. And I also encourage you to look online, like I always do for every assignment. You don't have to just use these two artists as inspiration. I just gave you these because I like them and I think they're good. But please type in collage artwork and see what you come up with online. Here's another one. It's like two men kind of fighting, but then there's a horse race going down here. So the proportion here, right? Why are these so big in comparison to this? We don't really have giant people in real life. So what's going on here? Okay. So the questions. So making your viewer ask questions and try to answer those questions. Not for you to answer, but for your viewers to answer. So the next artist is George Littlechild, and George Littlechild is a First Nations artist from Canada. He's part Plains Cree. His mother was part Plains Cree, and his father was of mixed Mi'kmaq and Scottish heritage. So he likes to use collage and images, sometimes photographs of people he actually knows, sometimes, and they're usually photocopied or image transferred onto the paper. But he also used painting. So if you want to use painting or drawing as well in your collage, you're not just limited to gluing pictures and words on the paper. You can also add paint. You can use any material you want. You can use pen, you could use marker, you could use crayon, you could use pencil. So don't feel you're limited to just the collage for this project. And George Littlechild likes to, mostly his art, he says, is to inform non-Indigenous or non-First Nations people about First Nations culture, and with an effort to kind of get rid of racism and give people that knowledge. So that they're more aware and educated about things that have been repressed. So he has done artwork on residential schools and things like that in reference to his own culture. And so that's that. And here are a couple more they did. He also made some children's books. So here you can see he's taken the whole picture, and in other parts he's just used part of the picture. So here it's a whole frame in there, and here it's just like the bison that's been cut out. Okay, so you can read those. I really strongly suggest that I add the little bits about the artist for you to read to give you some background knowledge. It's important to learn about other artists and their artwork. So it's really important to read those things and kind of learn about them, not just look at their art, but also read and learn about them. So that's why I add the words. It's really important for you to read those things. It'll give you a better idea and a better understanding of why people make their art, and maybe some ideas about why you can make your art. So this is why these artists made their art. But why do you make your art? What's your purpose, and who is your audience? So you can think about George Littlechild and his audience of non-Indigenous people, right? He wanted to inform and educate non-Indigenous peoples. And who is your audience? Why are you making your artwork, and who are you making your artwork for? So those are some things to consider when you're doing this project as well. So it's not just the collage part, but we're kind of looking at audience and purpose for our artwork. So I hope that makes sense. I hope that gives you some ideas and is trying to get you to start thinking about that and try to have fun with this, because I think collages are a really great way to make art, especially if you're not super confident in your drawing abilities, because you can take someone else's photograph and add it and make it look realistic that way, but also not realistic, if that makes sense. Okay.